Hello and welcome everyone to the Chronicles of Chase. The last 6 episodes, the first 6 episodes of this channel's content have been Naltithconet, a short story told in installments. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, though Naltithconet is not finished. I repeat, Naltithconet is not finished. Please look out for part 7 coming in a couple of days. But today's installment is going to be a short story time, which will be a type of video on this channel. I'm going to try to not have these stories in any installments, right? So if you're clicking on a short story time video, you can be assured that there is a beginning, middle, and end, and a full story within that video. So without further ado, I present to you short story time number 1, Cartagia and Hericua. Horatio looks out over the sandy expanse that leads up to the coastlines of Cartagia, admiring the dual sunset in the distance. A soft breeze rustles the leaves of the bush beside him as a butler in the royal guard enters the patio, clearing his throat in the process to announce his presence. "Your tea, sir," he states simply, offering the tray with the glass to Horatio. Horatio accepts, muttering a quick "Thank you, Pierre," and thus dismissing him. He turns back to the horizon, watching the left sun continue to win its race beyond the waves with the right sun. Hanging off behind the left sun, large and ominous, was his former home, the planet of Hericua. It had moved into its forward orbit of the suns, a period that had lasted 3 years so far. It would last another 2 before it finished, and the planets pulled back even. In this time, its hulking mass would often blot out the sun's warmth, leading to blizzards and freezing deaths across the surface of Cartagia. Horatio had to think hard to even remember a time he walked Hericua's surface. All the thoughts he could muster made him question why Hericua and Cartagia hated each other so. Beaches, ocean, and the 12-year cycle of 6 years tropical, 6 years near Arctic conditions. They had so much in common, it was hard to differentiate the two, in Horatio's opinion. Even the rating was so similar it made his head spin. He had been captured 15 years prior, in one of the many winter-on-summer raids that the two planets waged upon each other. 2 of the King of Cartagia, his adoptive father Annibal's sons, had been taken in raids 12 and 6 years ago, respectively. But all of the captives, at least the royal captives, like Horatio and the king's sons Gregor and Vanya, were treated as extensions of the royal family, princes and princesses for all intents and purposes. And many, like Horatio, had been kidnapped for so long that they had more affection for their adoptive parents than they did their actual blood relations. It was for this reason that many captives were either rescued before 5 years were up or abandoned forever, assumed to be loyal subjects of the opposing planet's regime at that point. Horatio, his adoptive father Annibal and mother Adela, his adoptive brothers Auguste and Audrey, and his adoptive sister Camilla, along with his actual sister Hidelga, captured 4 years after him, had all voyaged to the southern shores of the main continent of Cartagia in the usual royal fashion in a winter cycle of avoiding the cold at any costs. Even now, though, the chill and the breeze off the water puts a shiver into Horatio's body, making him pull the blanket he has brought onto the patio tight to his body. As the left sun crests below the waves, sending the surface of Cartagia into a dim pinkish-purple low light, Horatio sees 3 dim lights blinking in the distance. He sits forward in his seat, shoulders leaning far over his knees, and squints his eyes to get a better look. As his vision focuses, the waves lapping over the right sun, providing lower and better light in which to see. He thinks he can make out the ominous flashing pattern of a nebula lancer. All 3 lights blink in unison, winking death and destruction back at Horatio. His heart drops to his royal slippers as his mind scrambles. It is fucking year 3. Year 3 of a long winter. How could the Hericuans be so heartless? The planets had a well-established system of winter raids, but the system had always been for the planet that was in winter to raid the planet that was in summer. This system, as barbaric as it was, had helped sustain life across the two planets in this distant system, so far from Imperial assistance, or even thought in general. Cartagia's raid just 6 months ago had filled community food stores across the planet. People were surviving because of it, and people would have been allowed to survive in the exact same way 4 or 5 years from now when Hericua was starving. A raid like this, though, this was meant to starve, to end life upon the entire planet. This was a raid of greed and wanton aggression. Horatio's heart rises from his feet, through his stomach and into his chest, his cranium, blazing with righteous rage on behalf of his adoptive planet that captured him so long ago. Before he knows it, he is sprinting down the hall, mashing the comm system in the wall and barking information into the PA. Code Barca, Code Barca. There are Lancers in the horizon to the north-northwest. I repeat, there are 3 Nebula Lancers in the horizon to the north-northwest. Horatio releases the button, sprinting for the passage to the armory. His technical weapons training had paused briefly, from ages 5 to 10, while he was being re-educated in the Cartagian way. This precaution was one that was taken with all captives, and it often set them back to a point in military endeavors that they were never able to rise past lieutenant. Not Horatio. Once fully certified, he had cut swiftly through the officer courses and ranks. He had become the youngest general in recent Cartagian history, going back at least 75 years. This fact made him swell with pride on calm days. Today, it made his legs churn, his breath pump through his chest until it feels like it will explode as he paces his way to his command post. By now, the red alarm lights are flashing throughout the royal compound, alarms blaring in his ears. As he rounds the corner into the armory, he sees his adoptive father, Annabelle, and mother, Adela, his adoptive brothers, Auguste and Audrey, and his adoptive sister, Camilla, and blood relation, Hidelga, coming from the other direction. Auguste and Audrey turn into the armory as the king, queen, Camilla, and Hidelga mill about at the entrance. Hidelga is berating the royal family. I'm old enough to fight, Hericua be damned. Horatio's going out to command entire legions, and yet I'm sequestered to the bunker? King Annabelle steps forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. Even I must go to the bunker, child. Do you not think I too want to defend Cartagia? Have wanted to defend it each and every raid since I became king? But it is not the way. We will not send 2 Hericuans into battle together, especially not commanding troops. You must come to the bunker with us. His grip tightens in a concerning but familiar way that Horatio immediately spots, perceiving its intent, its finality. He continues into the armory, dressing briskly in his armor before grabbing his blaster, draping his scimitar over his shoulder, and following his adoptive brothers out towards the front of the complex. More troops fall in behind them, forming a human shield around the royal party. The team's first objective is to shepherd the royal party to the bunker. The group moves toward the door, quickening their pace dramatically once they get outside. Horatio sweats profusely underneath the inner layer of his suit. As the fabric dampens further and the wind sweeps across the group, the chill returns, sending another shiver down his spine. When the group is 400 meters from the bunker, half of the soldiers, led by Audrey, detach with the royal family and move off towards the right in its direction. Horatio and Auguste move towards the battlement's defenses at the left of the compound. The Nebula Lancers now loom large in the distance. Horatio sees their landing mechanisms begin to emerge from the smooth bottoms. This tells him they are less than 2,000 meters from the surface. Just as he is doing this calculation in his mind, running at a full tilt and trying not to fall, he sees something come hurtling from the bottom of one of the lances, followed by another 2 objects scorching out from the lances on each side. The flames, shimmering from their tails, blended perfectly with the pinks and purples of the twilight sky, leaving a deadly trail of smoke and ash hanging in the atmosphere behind them. "No!" Horatio screams, halting and turning back towards the royal party. They are 50 meters from the bunker, 49 meters too far. One of the missiles slams into the bunker, blowing the top structure to smithereens in an intense explosion of light and fire. The other 2 rocket into the surface of Cartagia, one in between the royal party and one in the direct center. Light and heat fill Horatio's vision as he is blasted off his feet, the world going dark as his head whiplashes onto the dunes behind him. He comes to with his ears ringing, the deep purple of sunset nearly gone in the sky in his eyes. He scrambles up, looking off towards the disfigured distance. 3 craters, smoking and charred, remain in the distance. At the base of the furthest one, like a taunting mass, is the exposed but unharmed, reinforced walls of the royal bunker. In the second is sand and glass, unevenly distributed, and spreading in the smoldering ruins of the bomb. Horatio cannot bring himself to look at the nearest crater for too long, averting his eyes as soon as they grace the surface of the bloodied, body-strewn mess that exists there. He turns and runs for the turrets, yelling things he cannot remember, trying to rally the troops between wails of grief. August is weeping on the ground near the front of the group, his eyes sunken and lost. Horatio grasps him by the loops of his suit, yanks him up by the shoulders, tells him that he loves him, that they must keep going, for his parents, for their sisters, for Cartagia. August recovers himself, the message finally making it through, and the troops rally to their battle stations. They are only a detachment of Cartagia's military, a royal wintering party that never expected to be attacked, and they've lost half of their numbers, but they fight with the rage and the desperation of a cornered predator. One of the lances is shot out of the sky with heavy artillery, exploding in a delightful pyre of revenge above the distant sea. The bedraggled group of men cheers wildly, delighted that they will have one fewer to deal with. They can feel the odds shifting. The second lancer moves forward and makes a landing, its retinue pouring out onto the beaches. Horatio moves to lead a detachment and head them off before they can reach the battlements, but August stops him. "Please," Horatio begs, "you are the last crown prince of Cartagia. You should be in the bunker right now. I must go." "No," August says firmly, turning to lead the men towards the lancer. "You are as Cartagian as any of us, and we cannot afford to lose you right now." He glances up at the last lancer, strangely hovering over the near ocean. Why hadn't they landed yet, his eyes said. Everyone on the Cartagian side was wondering the same thing, and he was right. Crown Prince he may be, but a general by merit he most definitely was not. He had been saved at great cost to the Cartagians on multiple raids over the last 10 years. Horatio lets him go, turning back to the gun he is manning and watching the men move off into the distance with dread. They fight valiantly in the foreground before him, as Horatio and the men above them try to support in any way possible. Somehow, August and his men hold the line again and again, until it is hard to believe there are any more men on the ship. A final wave appears, with an entourage of chieftains clustered at its center. They are identifiable by the bright colors adorning their necks, dancing under the lancer's ship lights in the pitch-black night. August and the 40 or so men that remain charge, but they are repulsed, taking heavy losses. Horatio watches as the generals laugh, marching slowly down the rampart behind their ground troops. His blaster overheats, leaving him helpless as August mounts a final charge. His men cut through the front lines with efficiency, wedging like a knife in butter through the center of the column. Then, all of a sudden, about 3/4 of the way through, they are stopped cold in their tracks. The men surrounding August fall one by one, until it is him and one man on either side. Horatio's blaster cools enough so that he can use it just as a guard of the general walks through the few men remaining between he and August and decapitates him, retrieving the officer's medal along with August's head and turning back towards his superiors. Horatio tries to shoot him down, but the blaster's scopes aren't accurate enough. Hericua and ground troops fall left and right around the nave, but he makes his sojourn to his bosses untouched, handing over the medal and August's gore-leaking head with a flourish. Horatio and the other men remaining at the battlements sweep large swaths across the quickly retreating ground troops. Few of them make it back onto the ship with their overlords. Horatio's vision blurs with bitter tears for August, for his mother and father, his sisters, his screams drowned out by the percussive recoil of the blaster. The second lancer's jets activate, bringing it slowly to a hover above them as it rises, then retreats to a flanking position alongside the other Lancer. Horatio peppers its side with blasts, knowing them to be insignificant. If the men behind him could only get the last anti-nebula artillery shell loaded, and for the love of Cartagia hit the command ship, the day yet may be saved. Just as the thought occurs to him, he turns toward the launch station behind him, sees the rocket loaded and at the ready, but it is facing the wrong direction. "No! The other ship! Aim for the other ship!" Horatio screams, his voice drowned out by the sounds of battle as he gesticulates wildly to the left, towards the right ship. His heart sinks as he watches the rocket launch, with no corrections made, careening through the sky and hitting the heavily depleted landing ship in the flank. The Lancer breaks in two from the explosion, both ends fishtailing wildly through the air and scattering men here and there from their guts before crashing into the surf. The men give a cheer, weaker than when they sunk the first Lancer, as Horatio turns back toward the men in despair. "We have to move," he commands, repeating it a couple of times and rallying as many men to him as he can. They gather the ammunition and weaponry that they can carry on their backs and scatter from the battlement station, imploring the men who stick around to join them. They do not, calling Horatio and the men who flee into the woods near the complex cowards as they go. "Fools!" Horatio curses as they make their way into the tree line, into cover. Horatio and the other men watch from the very same trees just minutes later as the Lancer lights the battlements up with heavy explosives, incendiaries so hot and powerful that the men closest are knocked from their feet, and the trees near the blaze, still some 400 meters from the forest, begin to singe and smoke. After 90 minutes, the fire ceases and the smoke clears. Horatio and his cortege of men in the woods can see only rubble. They have continued moving up into the forest and the foothills, but no bodies are visible to their sight. They thought the third Lancer may move on, fly back to Hericua, to rally another force. It clearly held some important individuals from their planet. Otherwise, it would not have held itself out of the hand-to-hand fighting. But it does not. It continues hovering for the entire night, with Horatio and his men standing vigil in rotations below. Intermittent blaster shots strafe the forest. Horatio does not take a shift off until the sun has risen, finally laying down on the packed dirt of the forest floor as the sun begins to crest over the hills behind him. After a few hours of restless sleep, plagued by the faces of those near and dear to him so recently lost, a young lieutenant rouses him from his sleep with the news that the Lancer was landing. After the initial touchdown, the days and weeks begin to blur together. Horatio and his men plague the Herricuans day and night with raids from the forest, and the Herricuans fight back with indiscriminate fire into the forest, carving it into bits and pieces that become harder and harder to disappear within. Horatio's lieutenants change in what feels like a 12-hour cycle. His force was maybe 30 strong at this point, mostly privates or new recruits who never thought they would find themselves in a position like this. Does anyone think they'll be in a position like this? Horatio thinks, grimly to himself, leaning against a palm in one of the few groves left near the beach. He couldn't fathom how he and these men could fight for too much longer, but he equally couldn't fathom that the Lancer still had men within to send out and fight. It felt like an ever-replenishing fountain of human sacrifice. For what? He knew what he and his men were fighting for, and they had almost seen it to the end. Cartagia had to be defended against an attack as brutal, as brazen, as sick as this. They couldn't give up now. "Horatio!" A metallic voice blares from the beach, making he and his men start from their seats and to their posts. A spotter with a telescope trots up to Horatio's side as his name blares out again. The chieftain's party is exiting the craft. It looks like it may be the last of them. Horatio's gut lurches with hope, a dangerous and potent fuel that had nearly run out as of late. He grasps the telescope and peers through the glass. The party below the trees, disembarking onto the sands of Cartagia, certainly had the look of an officer's party. Sapphire, teal, jade, and plum adorned the necklines and lapels of the crew, their many colors dancing off of the obsidian helmets above them. Horatio tries to quell the hope he is feeling, to channel it into meaningful action. "It's now or never, men," he bawls with all his might, trying to keep his voice from wavering or cracking. The men gather round him, bedraggled and weary, many of them leaning against either tree trunks or their own blaster barrels. "Cartagians, these rat son of a bitch Herricuans came to wipe us out. This winter raid was meant to be the end of Cartagia, the end of you. Now, here we stand, the last defenders against this barbaric villainy. The chieftains and high-ranking generals of Hericua have exposed themselves to survey their victory. Now we shall deliver them defeat." The shabby, decrepit column moves out from the grove, all of the men screaming in unison. Horatio leads the front of the column as they sprint down the hill, angling wildly towards the officer party at the base of the lance's ramp. At the base of the hill, Horatio's vision begins to gray and blur. He stumbles, then falls before he is picked up and supported under each arm by two of his lieutenants. "We must keep going, sir," one of them says in a surprisingly gentle tone. Horatio tries to regain his footing, eventually settling to a jog near the back of the group. Just as his feet are back underneath him, the column crashes into the Herricuans' defenses. Men fall left and right, though Horatio feels like the odds are in their favor. Breastplate upon breastplate of bespectacled Herricuan livery is cast aside, carpeting the lancer's ramp in the colors of its home. They all mix with the slick crimson blood that is so omnipresent, getting into the Cartagians' eyes and making them slip on the ramp as they attempt to ascend to the dais of generals at the top. Through the vermilion and the rage, Horatio hardly notices the men of his column falling at a faster and faster rate, till only he and two nameless lieutenants remain, one on each side. First, the boy on his left falls, cut down by one of the 5 remaining Herricuans. 4 of them stand in a guard formation, while the 5th relaxes within their midst. He's not even reached for a weapon yet. Once again, Horatio's name booms through the air. At its mention, Horatio and his other lieutenant lunge towards the forward-facing guards. Horatio's blade buries deep into the gap between helmet and suit, slicing through the connective tissue and deep into the guard's neck. He hears a scream and turns to see the last boy soldier of Cartagia have his head blown off by a Herricuan blaster. The guard he had attacked slumps forward, across the barrel of the weapon, his side leaking profuse amounts of blood from the blade sticking out from it. The remaining 2 guards step forward, placing their bodies between Horatio and whoever this high-ranking Herricuan is. Their blasters, already at Horatio's eye level, bore deep into the flesh of his forehead. He glares up at them. "Horatio, disarm," the disembodied voice says from behind them. He keeps glaring at the guards, slowly lowering his saber, one hand on the handle, the other on the far tip of the blade. When his hands, more exactly his sleeves, become parallel with the guards' hearts, he lets loose. The sleeve cannons singe his skin as they fire, sending white-hot flashes of pain into his brain. As the guards fall before him, Horatio grips the saber handle tightly once more and swings it in a vicious arc, angling up and into the remaining Herricuan's ribs. He had moved at the last moment, in what Horatio thought was a last-ditch effort to arm himself, to kill him. Instead, the hands have gone well past the belt of weaponry, making a beeline for the fasteners on the helmet. The clasps click open as Horatio's blade delves deep into the Herricuan's flesh, cracking ribs and snapping sinew as he does. Horatio. The disembodied voice from before comes from underneath the clasp of the helmet, gurgling blood through the crevice. Horatio wrenches the blade further into the Herricuan's side. "How do you know me? Why have you done this?" Horatio sobs, racked by the loss of everything he ever knew, everything he had ever loved. "We came for you." The voice comes again, barely audible beneath the helmet. The figure fumbles at the clasps again, trying to take the helmet off, but cannot get a grip on it. He lets his arms fall to his side, leaking a new wave of blood out of the wound in his ribs. "What the fuck do you mean you came for me?" Horatio screams, letting go of the blade and fumbling with the helmet for a few moments before he can remove it. The ashen face inside smiles back, a sick smile that makes Horatio want to vomit. What the fuck could this murderer be smiling at him for? How could all of this have been for him? Son, the Herricuan says, coughing blood into Horatio's face before it dribbles down his chin and onto his chest. We came for you, he repeats, reaching out and grasping onto Horatio's forearm. Horatio tries to recoil, but the grip tightens. Your brothers, your cousins, the Herricuan says between coughs and gags, gesturing to the gore-riddled lancer ramp beneath them before slumping over, his grip on Horatio's arm mercifully loosening. Horatio turns, muttering, no, 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 as he surveys the landscape before him, schlepping the dead weight of his biological father off his arm, away from him. The bunker's husk lies off in the distance, along with most of his adoptive family. The Cartagian forest beyond them is Swiss cheesed with red and black, bodies peppered across his landscape. And before them all, behind him, lies his original family. Tears streamed down Horatio's face, though he did not weep nor cry out. A wellspring of moisture springs down from his eyes, across his cheeks and into his chest. Horatio unbuttons his spacesuit at the front, exposing the soft underside as he walks back down the slick ramp. He looks around one last time, trying to be sure, trying to think of any other options. Then, he trains his blade tip onto the center of his heart, planting its hilt into the soil of Cartagia, which had nurtured him so well, and falls forward, down into the sand. The blade pierces his heart, almost instantly, the innards of his spacesuit being half flooded with blood as his heart gushed carnage down into his shoes and the earth below. Horatio's last breaths come, the horizon of Cartagia dimming as he watches the left sun win its race beyond the horizon with the right sun. Hanging off beyond the left sun, large and ominous, lies his former home, the planet of Hericua, hanging ominously over his body as it leaks lifeblood into the loamy turf of Cartagia. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been Short Story Time #1, Cartagia and Hericua. I hope you liked the story. If you did, please like and subscribe. And thank you so much for viewing and checking out the story. Leave a comment if you have any thoughts.